r/AskReddit, Richard Feynman said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot." What are some real-life examples of this? My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well, he normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the two cancelled their sugars out and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knows how to combine things. I have a PhD and I am an idiot in most respects. All it takes to get a PhD is to be really good at or persistent in doing research in one narrow area of study. Edit. So several commenters pointed out that I simplified things too much. A PhD also requires hard work, luck, and some basic competence in a topic. But that doesn't preclude one from being completely clueless in other aspects of life. Peter Duesberg, molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and well known for his work, became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majori who infected her infant through breastfeeding thinking, hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS. I worked with a girl that graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school, so one day she was doing that and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, "Oh, you went to Brown? And yet, here we are, together in the same place, doing the same job." I have a PhD, and I work with a bunch of PhDs. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a PhD syndrome. I had a professor for higher mathematics who had real difficulties figuring out how to extract a cup of coffee from the vending machine. Bless him. Not quite PhD. But I was at a party, in the UK, full of med students and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later and he's still on the couch in pain and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. Dr. Ben Carson, one of the most skilled neurosurgeons alive, thinking that the Egyptian pyramids were used to store grain. I worked IT for a hospital. I was speaking to a doctor who forgot his password. While he was spelling his name phonetically over the phone, he said, "Z as in xylophone." Needless to say, my eyebrows raised. As someone who works security in a hospital, I can say a good 90% of the doctors there are smart but lack any type of common sense, and sometimes I wonder how they function on a day-to-day basis. Edit. I also forgot to mention I'm almost 2 years in a relationship with a pediatric cardiologist and it's as shocking at home as it is with the ones I work with LMAO, but I can't say it's boring. I was at a keg party at college and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later someone else complains the beer is out. I told them the keg was full a few minutes ago and it was a tap problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg and find the intake was closed again. opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty a beer. As she is leaving, my sweet mate comes in and goes to the intake and closes it. Now my sweet mate is a straight A student who gets all A's mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg. So I tell him that he needs to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tap. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer is carbonated, air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So I asked him two questions: if it is not needed, why is there the upper tap, and does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in a glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds and his only response was, "I have a 4.0, what is your GPA?" Then he walked away. I know many people in the science field that conduct double-blind randomized controlled experiments in the lab and then go home and check their horoscopes. I work with medical doctors all the time for work. Doctors are some of the dumbest smart people I have ever met. I had a boss who was an engineer who put a couple $100 in change in a bank's pneumatic drive-through tube where it got stuck and they had to use a jackhammer to get it out. He was upset that the bank was charging him for this because he didn't know this would happen. They had large signs saying not to put change in the tubes, including on the tubes themselves. My ex had a real lack of knowledge and common sense when it came to children. She's currently completing her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. She was confused though when I said I couldn't go out after putting my toddler to bed as I had no one to babysit. In her mind, once my daughter was asleep, she no longer needed anyone here to take care of her. I chalked it up to cultural differences and never being around children. Eventually though, our opinions on raising kids differed too much and I had to end things for my daughter's sake. I worked for a statistician who had a PhD in statistics and was dumb as a post. OTOH, I worked with this really smart guy who happened to have a PhD, and as he said it, all that means is I did the work for a PhD. My first call at my first IT job was in a medical laboratory. There was a doctor who had been in the job for years and she called saying her computer would not power on. I walked her through some troubleshooting and nothing worked. Is the computer plugged in? Okay. Is the monitor on? Okay. When did the problem start? Type of questions were asked and she answered them all. I go up to her office and indeed the computer is plugged into a power strip which is plugged into itself. Cleaning crew had deep cleaned her office and never plugged anything back in. Dr. Plugged the power strip into itself thinking that as long as it was plugged in, that's all she needed. I went to 3 ERs when I felt something was wrong with my arm. It felt like a bug by day 1 and by day 4 a bungee cord from my elbow to my wrist. 3 doctors said it was a skin irritation or dermatitis. I kept telling them something was wrong. I have no medical degree. I work in property management. Day 5 I walked into another ER and said I don't care if I have to pay out of pocket or sit here all night, but something is wrong with my arm. Finally, after many rude looks and comments, I was given an ultrasound of my arm. Then rushed to a MRI. Then told I was being admitted. A 3 blood clot in my upper arm, 2 in my chest area, and 1 had passed my lung already. Diagnosed with factor 2 gene mutation 22 days later, blood clotting disorder. Dr. Oz. He really went to Harvard. He really is a university professor. He really did pioneer several cardiac surgery techniques. Also, he promoted hydroxychloroquine to fight COVID after reading about it on the internet. I don't mention the obvious scams that he flogs on his TV show because I don't think he really believes in them. I think it's an act he puts on just to scam gullible people. My ex-boyfriend's mother was a linguistics professor and knew over 10 languages. She was also one of the dumbest people I've ever met. Some examples: she believed that in case of emergency stewardesses catapult out of the plane. She was also convinced donating blood causes some blood disease and you can die because of it. but my favorite one was when she said her son's orthopedic problems are not a result of a serious injury he had. His knee hurts because he eats too much ketchup. A doctor telling me my 6-month-old couldn't have strep because she was infant and taking her to the ER because she was getting worse and no urgent cares were open and finding out she had strep. This is basically what The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam is about. It tells the story of how the Kennedy and Johnson administrations got the United States into the Vietnam War, and it particularly zeroed in on Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. He kept escalating the conflict at every turn, and if you questioned him he could bury you in data showing that the US was winning the war and the Defense Department just needed more troops and more money to put us over the top. I'm grossly oversimplifying a great book, but that's the gist of it. A great companion piece to the book is a documentary called The Fog of War by Errol Morris. It's a one-on-one interview with Robert McNamara filmed near the end of his life where he ruminates on the lessons he's learned. After watching it, 90% of people come away from the experience thinking that McNamara is a particularly intelligent and sagacious man, even though there's a mountain of evidence showing that that's not the case. My college roommate, smartest person I've ever met, spent nearly an hour trying to shove a desk back into the corner of our room at an angle. She wouldn't listen to me because in her words she got this. After she finally gave up, I walked over, pulled the desk out completely and straightened it with the wall, and pushed it back in. One movement, no struggle. Many a time we had where I'd realize she might be the smart one but I've got more common sense. My uncle is smart as fuck. Multiple master's degrees in education and science, constantly wins awards for his teaching and high averages from his students. Tell me why this idiot needed me to remind him how to make ramen several times over? My professor, a brilliant neurosurgeon, once decided to directly smell a bottle of ammonia. He then told me don't smell that. I did not plan to. To get a doctorate, you need to know absolutely nothing about a wide range of subjects. My ex-wife with a PhD in neuroscience driving my car around with the handbrake on calling me to ask about the noise and smell. My great-uncle is a brilliant engineer but has zero social awareness. If I tell him a joke about, say, dogs he won't laugh but he'll tell you about how dogs' evolution mirrors humanity's and how our species are symbiotic or some shit. Then we explain to him that it was a joke, he'll replay it in his mind, and then laugh. Edit, I appreciate all the online diagnoses, but he's absolutely not autistic. I have been told that idiots are running the world, but if that's true I would have thought I would be a little higher up. I don't need to listen to you, I have credential. If you aren't willing to consider novel information because of the messenger, sorry, you're an idiot. In a personal note, my wife was a PhD candidate when we moved in together. Early on we went to a party and when we got home I told her I felt inadequate because I was the least educated person in every room and felt kinda dumb listening to them all go on about things I had no idea about. She said to me they each know the most about some little thing they just got their PhD about. Some gene mutation or how some molecule interacts in some rarefied environment, but apart from that, they're all just regular people who can't figure out how to match their socks or talk to a member of the opposite sex. She said you're one of the most curious people I know. Your library is bigger and more diverse than anyone else I know and you've actually read them. You ask questions and talk to everybody and have actual things to talk to them about because you know about things they're interested in. Now she's an MD PhD and all our friends are doctors of one kind of another and I'm still the least educated person at the party but now I can see people are just people and yes, you can be super smart about one thing or another and still buy a fuck up in the real world. It's way more important to be a good kind person who does what you say you'll do than the smartest kid in class, at least that's how we raised our kids anyway. Not a PhD but I know someone who has a master's in finance and thinks everyone should just own a house. I was like, how are they gonna pay for it? He was like they should work hard. I couldn't stop laughing. British historian David Starkey, he is only a historian in regards to Tudor England, 1485 to 1603. Other than that, he is a complete idiot, especially when it comes to politics. Worked at a tech company, was made team lead. One of our team members was a PhD in astrophysics. He would ping me constantly for how to do things that we had well documented. How to install certain programs, how to gain access to servers or code repositories. Literally we would sit in Zoom calls together and I would just read the instructions out loud and watch him do them. I was utterly confused as to how he could breathe by himself. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you have enjoyed this video and subscribe to never miss an upload.